All right, so we've got the project set up that we're going to be looking at, and this is a basic Xamarin Forms project. Let's run it here, and as you can see, it just has a title here, Welcome to Xamarin Forms. It's a basic boilerplate. You click the button, and it gets added. And what we're going to do is we're going to convert this. We're going to do an in-place conversion of this into a single project .NET MAUI application. Leave all the code exactly the same, all the actual code that's running the executable, and then just change all the scaffolding to get this happen. So let's get going. So the first step to doing this, I like to actually add an actual .NET MAUI project. So let's go ahead and let's add one. And what this is going to do is it's going to serve as a frame of reference that we can use to bounce ideas off of and just see how things are supposed to work, so that we have a place to pull things from as needed. So we've got our basic .NET MAUI project up and running, and I'll build it here just to ensure that everything is going. And then I should be able to actually and that's basically built now. So let's see if we can actually run this to see how it looks, just to ensure that it's working as it should. So here's how a basic .NET MAUI application would look. And if I click on that, as you can see, it's doing the same thing. It's clicking. So that's where we're at right now. We know that's working. So let's get going. So if you look closely at this .NET MAUI project as compared to the Xamarin Forms project, the one that we're going to be using, you'll notice that it has these packages under dependencies, whereas in the Xamarin Forms projects, you see that they all have the typical references or package references sort of flow to it. So the first thing we're going to do is go into the project files, and we're actually going to modify it. We're going to be using this main one, right? So these are the ones we're going to get rid of slowly. We're going to be using this main one, right? So let's actually set that as startup. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into this project file, and we're going to modify it to use the SDK style format that .NET MAUI applications use. So we got the project file open. So let's start slinging the code. So first of all, we don't need these two anymore. We're not going to be using them anymore. And instead, we're going to be using a target frameworks project. So let's put that here, put that in here. And here's the things that we're looking at with these. The first one is that it's saying that, hey, it supports .NET Android, .NET iOS, and then there's a condition here. Hey, if I'm running on Windows, because the Windows 10 stuff has to run on Windows for it to work, then we're actually going to actually be targeting the Windows SDK. So that we set that up, and you'll notice that everything is gone kind of haywire. There's all kinds of crazy stuff here. So we actually have to reload the project. Just go ahead and reload it. Okay. And now when we open up this .NET MAUI, we notice now that it's no longer showing Xamarin Tamara is no longer showing the previous way the projects were, and it's now showing .NET 7 Android, .NET 7 iOS, and .NET 7 Windows. Now we're going to fill out the extra things that are needed in this project for it to fully be a .NET MAUI project. First of which is that we need to add the use MAUI element there. And then we also want to make sure that this is an executable and not a library, because it's actually going to be running. And then we also want this to be a single project, as we discussed. So here's a single project right there. And I'm also going to add something to enable implicit usings, because I like those. And they actually are helpful to the project, because then you don't have to keep on adding all these reference types. And then finally, I'm going to add a root namespace. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that here. And the root namespace is just going to be the namespace of this, which is Xamarin 2 MAUI. Now that's that done, we will once again reload the project. Perfect. Next, we need to add all the supported OS platforms that are going to be allowed to run on this. So I'm going to just copy these because it's a lot to type here. And there it is. It's really not much more than that. And then we also want to add some information about the specific application that that we're using. So I'm going to do that in a second now. It's just grabbing it and copy that here. I'm going to call it Xamarin to MAUI. Oops. Xamarin to MAUI. And I'm going to give it that name. And I'm going to give it a new grid. All right, I won't be needing that right there. We'll leave the application versions the same. And then in here, I'm just saying what are all the supported platforms and saying iOS, Android, Windows, and then the target platform version is also set at that. There's a few more things we have to do here. If you look down here, it's still saying that this is portable. We don't need that anymore. And then obviously we're not using Xamarin Forms, so we can get rid of that. We are going to be using the Microsoft's login framework, so I'm going to add that in here. And then that gets us to a nice little stable place. And then finally, where I'm going to add a whole bunch of things. They're going to seem like gobbledygook right now, but ultimately they really showcase, or I'm sorry, ultimately they show where the files are going to be located inside and the folder structure that's going to exist inside of the Xamarin project. So we're going to add, so finally, we're going to be adding an item group that's going to have all the app icons, the images, and pretty much the folder structure that's going to exist inside of the MAUI project. Set it up now. I know those files aren't going to be there, but we're going to later on copy all the appropriate files where they're supposed to be. So again, this is a lot of typing, so I'm just going to add it in here for brevity and get it going. So you notice now that we're getting a lot of errors for all the associated projects that are there. And that's because the way Xamarin Forms works, basically this main project that we're using up here is actually referenced by all these underlying projects. And of course, these are all .NET standard projects because they're all Xamarin Forms based. So the best way to get rid of those errors quickly is to essentially remove the Xamarin Forms sort of like a library project from all of them, right? So that we can build that freely or work with that freely without necessarily having any issues, right? So that gets rid of that. Then what I'm going to do then is go over here and basically go to configuration builder and essentially remove build or deploy from each of these so that they essentially don't build when my MAUI app builds. Okay, so we're making some headway now. So let's now move the properties over from the MAUI project onto these projects so that this can actually run. So there's basically running a .NET MAUI project is not as simple as just running the executable. And this inside of these launch settings, you can actually see the command that's passed in and how it works. So we're essentially just going to move this verbatim in here. Right. And now when we run this project, once we get it building and everything, we won't have any problems. It'll run the way it's supposed to. Okay, so now we've got that that's set up. So let's take a step back and let's go and let's fix some of the resources side of this. So as you can see, because of what we put into the project file, it's showing that, hey, you've referenced some stuff you've referenced a resources folder, but I don't see a resources folder here. So we can go in and create that. So let's go ahead and let's create a new folder called resources. And then once you create that, you see that that link goes away. But in here, we're seeing these, right? So let's do the same thing here, right? So create a new folder called app icon. And then create another folder called splash, right? Oh, I misspelled that. There you go. And then there are some additional folders that we need. So what I'll do here now is I'll just copy them from the Xamarin project, which is why it's good, the MAUI project, because basically, for the most part, these projects are, this is a startup project, so there's, we don't have any unique images and things of that nature, so we can just copy this stuff over. So now that we've copied it over, let's go ahead and let's ensure that the proper build activity exists for each one of these items, right? So for the app icon, that was the one that we actually did not, we just created the folder. Let's move these icons in here. And I believe, let's make sure for splash, let's do the same thing. Put this in here. And fonts are there, images, raw. Okay, so we got everything. So let's just go through, we got this properties section right here. Let's just go through and make sure that the build action for each of these is correct. So over here, this is saying Android resource, and this should actually be saying MAUI icon, right? And that one is correct. Oh, no, that was the one we got. Same thing, should say MAUI icon. Then over here in the fonts, it should say MAUI font, which it's saying. Over in the images, it should say MAUI image. The raw, MAUI asset, the splash, that should say MAUI splash screen. MAUI splash screen right there. Go back there, okay. And then assets splash, MAUI splash screen, and then the styles, they should both be saying MAUI XAML, and all the XAML should actually be saying MAUI XAML. So it looks like everything is on point right now. It looks like we're well on our way to creating this awesome .NET MAUI application based on the Xamarin Forms application. So the next thing we need is that .NET MAUI applications have something called a MAUI program file that basically starts up and launches the MAUI application. Once again, I won't be creating that from scratch because we're trying to get through this really quickly. So I'll just add it. The key thing to note is that it has to have obviously the right namespace. Right now, this is not the right namespace, so let's change that. I think we are in Xamarin to MAUI. There we go. And then what's going to happen is that for all the subsequent projects that we add, or I guess projects is the right word. Basically, previously, these were in individual projects, but now they're going to be rolled into this one project. And so for each one of the folders, which ultimately represents a project, they're all going to make a call to this create MAUI app, right? And that's where the console start is going to be like the public static main string. It's going to be in each one of these projects, one for iOS, one for Android, one for Windows, and they all ultimately call this create MAUI app. That's the way it works. So it's very important that we create the MAUI app. So since we're here, let's go ahead and let's also go through and update these files that we have here so that they are using the appropriate things that they're supposed to use. So the application file is supposed to use application, but we're not going to need on start or any of those. And then over here, you see how it says Xamarin Forms? Well, it should not say that. Now it should say MAUI, right? So we're going to change that to say MAUI. Right? And that should fix that. And then the assembly info, we're not using Xamarin Forms, so again, we can get rid of pretty much everything here. I'll keep the file, but I'll just get rid of that. And then the main page has the same issue. Over here, it should not say Xamarin Forms, it should say MAUI, right? So you see that it's fixed all the issues. And then over here, it should say content page. And if we go in here, just get rid of the Xamarin Forms, right? And we can actually check here as well to see if there's any, there we go, so get rid of these. And that would essentially be everything here. Just double check. Perfect. So right now we're well on our way to getting things done. The only issue we have now is that we actually don't have any code. We have the initial code, but we don't have any heads, I should say, right? One for iOS, one for Android, one for Windows. So let's go ahead and let's create that. And the way you do that, as you can see here, is that you create these platforms folders, and then within these platform folders, you have one folder for each of the platforms. And then in there is where you'd copy the individual files for the things. So let's go ahead and let's create those quickly. Okay, so I've got the platforms folder created, and I've got the individual platforms that I'm going to be working on. As we discussed, Android, iOS, and Windows. I'm not doing Catalyst for this demo, and we're not doing Kaizen either. So now that we have those folders set up, the next thing to do is to start copying things into those folders from the original Xamarin Forms applications that we previously had. We'll start out with the Android SDK and the Android related thing. So the first things first, let's minimize some of this so we can see what we're doing. And on the Android side, we need to copy over, obviously, our main activity. We also need to copy over the manifest, which is inside of the properties folder. And then we need basically a launching application for it. So I'm going to pull it from here, not application, I keep saying application, but the main application, basically the launch for it. So we're going to copy it from there. We're going to have to rename the namespaces to get it working. We will also be pulling the resources from there. And since the resources here are literally just colors, I'm actually going to just create the resources folder. And I'm actually going to copy the resources from the Xamarin Android application. So I'm going to take the values here, and I'm just going to put it in here. I'm going to open this up and ensure that we have everything that we need. So now that we have those copied over, we of course need to make sure that they have the right reference or the right build action. And in this case, the build action will be none for these. Let's save that. So now that we have that figured out, we can go into the actual Android platform and we can start playing around with it, right? So the first thing we need to do here is to ensure that our name matches up for the package name. So we've got here company name, Xamarin to MAUI. And I think in here we had it as ThinkMind. So let's take this right here. Let's just make sure that that matches up for whatever reason. Okay. The next thing we want to do is want to go into the actual classes. So we'll start with main activity. And in main activity, we basically first and foremost need to change this from that to basically say MAUI, right? So MAUI app compat. And then other than that, we don't need anything else in here for this initial demo. I'm going to just use my theme, get rid of the icon, get rid of the label. And then over here, I'm going to change it to density. There you go. And that's that. And then we'll go over to the main application and we'll do the same thing. So you notice that since this was copied over, it's still maintaining the same namespace. So obviously let's change that namespace so that we can see everything. And then once we do that, you'll see that by having a MAUI application, basically you override this create MAUI app, and all that does is call the static create MAUI app on the main program. And that's basically it for the Android application. So we can essentially go up here and I'll go down here and basically remove it from the project because we've taken everything that we need from it. Mind you, if you are doing anything, more sophisticated and you need to have the Android application available for you to be pulling files from, by all means, keep it. I'm just doing it here to kind of reduce the number of errors and things like that and slowly go through it. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do the same exact thing for iOS, and this time we'll be putting it into the iOS folder. So let's take main, let's take info, and let's take the app delegate and let's move it over. There you go. So now that we have it here, let me just clean things up a little bit by closing all tabs. We're not going to need main. Really, all that we need is over here where it says what it's doing. It's using the Xamarin Forms stuff. We just have to once again change it to say MAUI UI delegate. And then we don't need any of this. And of course, we're going to be doing the same thing. Override, create MAUI app. And then in here, we basically just make a call to the MAUI program dot, and we're returning that actually. Okay, and then we check to see if there's any issues with namespace. All looks good. The next thing we do is we go into the info.plist, and we'll open it in a text editor. And I just want to change this to 15.2. So it's a recommendation from Microsoft. And that is that in terms of iOS. Finally, we're going to be doing the Windows one, and this is usually the one where there's, there's just so many bells and whistles. So firstly, we'll get rid of the iOS, remove. And then over here on the Windows side, I'm going to move the package manifest over into the Windows folder. And then the app.xaml should ideally also be moved into the Windows folder. But in this case, I'm actually going to create one from scratch. I'm going to create a new, because for whatever reason, doing that doesn't seem to work. So I'll call it app.xaml. There we go. And then I will then simply copy the contents of this guy in here. Get rid of that, put that in there. And then I will also copy the backend code. It's basically all named the same thing. So, okay, there we go. So we got this open now. That's not called that. This is just going to be Win UI. Okay. And then this is obviously not a content page. It is a MAUI Win UI application. Okay, so initialize component will still be there. And then I, of course, need to override create MAUI app, just like before. And then in here, I'm going to be returning the MAUI program dot create MAUI app, right? So why is this having some issues here? Well, first of all, there's all this Xamarin Forms stuff, but also if you go into the actual UI of it, we need to add something that actually represents the MAUI app that we're creating. So I'll put it in here. Actually, the local is UWP. So let me change this to UWP. There you go. And then I'm going to change this to be a MAUI application like that. And that should resolve that at some point. It takes a while with Windows, with UWP. Okay, so it seems like it's come to its senses now. And we should be ready to go to do a couple builds here and there and see how they work. Okay, so we got everything working, and you'll notice that we're not getting all these crazy errors anymore. We're almost at the finish line. Last thing we need to do now is within the Windows application or the WinUI application, we do need to make some changes to the settings in the package.config, package.app, whatever they call it, app manifest. So it seems to use placeholders. And so what I found for myself to get this thing going the fastest was just to copy it from another MAUI project. So let's go ahead and let's do that. Go to splash screen, and in here, move that, put this here, and then entry point, go back here, put it there, do that. And then we go to the packaging area. In the packaging area, I'm gonna have this here. We're gonna need the placeholder here. And we'll call this there we go. And then we'll pick a cert from the store. And there you go. So building, and we're getting one error, which we'll address in a minute. But for now, let's go ahead and let's remove the Windows application because we're not going to need it anymore. We basically have everything we need. And we are good to go. Let's close that. Now that we have this all working, everything seems to be all set up. The only thing we want to do is make sure that that we're able to actually build it. So just go in here and check to make sure that it's able to deploy and build. And then once you have that, just run your project. And here we go. I'm going to move this out here so you can see that we're really still talking about the same thing here. And where it said welcome to Xamarin Forms, and I don't know if you can tell, but this is a very huge title bar. So that should be enough to say that something is up. But where it says that, I'm going to change it to say welcome to MAUI. And do the exclamation. And as you can see, everything continues to work. Click the buttons. It's all working. We are off to the races, up and running in .NET MAUI from Xamarin for a basic project in less than 30 minutes.